At Thanksgiving, my sister stood up, tapped her glass, and announced like she was accepting an award. Mom and Dad are signing the house to me. Emily gets nothing. The room erupted cheers, whistles. Someone even yelled, "About time I didn't clap." I didn't blink. I just smiled the way you smile when a storm hits, but you already know the roof is theirs, not yours. I set my fork down. "Dad," I said softly, "should I tell them, or will you?" His face drained. My sister froze. And in that moment, everyone knew something was coming. Before I take you into what happened after that silence, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? It helps to know there are people out there who've lived through families like mine. My name is Emily Nolan, and if you'd met my family before that Thanksgiving, you might have thought we were close. The kind of Midwestern picture people post on holiday cards, matching sweaters, smiling in front of a tree, pretending we never raised our voices. But families like mine don't break in loud, obvious ways. They crack in silence, in small choices, in who gets listened to and who gets ignored. And for as long as I can remember, I've lived in the quiet space where people only notice you when they need something. Jenna, my younger sister, never knew that space. She was the favorite, bright, loud, full of charm, the kind of girl relatives fawn over at gatherings, calling her a natural and a spark. I didn't hate her for it. I just learned early that I'd have to build my life on my own because nothing was ever going to be handed to me the way it was handed to her. Growing up, I watched my parents pour attention into Jenna like she was a plant that needed constant watering. Dance classes, summer camps, private lessons, things I was told we couldn't afford when I asked. Later, when I moved to Chicago for work, they called it selfish, like choosing independence meant I was abandoning them. Meanwhile, Jenna stayed close, visiting every weekend, sliding into that perfect little mold they'd carved out for her. Still, I kept coming home for holidays. For my grandmother, mostly. Evelyn Nolan, sharp mind, silver hair, the only person in the family who looked at me with real pride. When she hugged me at the door, it didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like being seen. She'd tap my cheek, whisper something like, "You're stronger than they think," then slip back into her chair, like she hadn't just given me enough fuel to last another year. This Thanksgiving felt strange before it even began. The air in the house was different. Thick, expectant, like everyone had been let in on a secret I wasn't meant to hear. Mom was darting around the kitchen with that tight smile she wears when she's hiding something. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. Jenna kept brushing lint off her dress, even though it was perfectly clean. And when I walked into the dining room, I noticed one more thing. An empty chair next to mine was missing. Not moved, not pushed aside, gone. I should have known then. You'd think the empty chair would have been enough of a warning, but in my family, the signs are always quiet before they explode. I sat down anyway, smoothing my napkin across my lap, pretending not to notice the way conversations dipped every time I entered the room. They'd go flat for a second like someone had pressed mute, then pick up again with forced laughter the moment I passed. Jenna floated around like the star of her own parade, checking the table settings, fixing angles on the centerpiece, whispering little asides to Mom that made them both smile. Every so often, she'd look at me with a tight-lipped grin, polite but hollow, like I was a coworker she barely tolerated. It wasn't always like this. For a long time, Jenna and I were just two kids, sharing a bedroom, passing notes under the door when we were supposed to be asleep. She used to braid my hair, steal my sweaters, beg me to drive her everywhere once I got my license. But somewhere between high school and adulthood, something shifted. She slipped comfortably into the role my parents built for her golden girl perfect daughter, while I slipped quietly out of the frame. The house situation started 6 months earlier, long before the announcement at Thanksgiving. It was a humid Saturday in June when Mom called asking me to come home for something important. No details, no warning. When I arrived, they ushered me straight to the dining table, the same table where everything would later fall apart. Dad had a folder laid out like a presentation. Mom smiled too hard, like her face hurt from stretching. "Sweetheart." Dad began, "We're refinancing the house. Just a simple signature. Better rates. You won't have to worry about anything." Even then, something in me tensed. My family never asked me for help unless they needed more than they were willing to admit. I flipped through the papers, heart thrumming as I tried to make sense of the numbers. Something felt off, too many pages, too many amounts blacked out, too many rushed explanations. "Can I take these with me?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "My lawyer can look at them." The silence that followed told me everything. Mom's smile faltered. Dad snapped the folder shut too quickly, like he regretted putting it in front of me in the first place. "It's just a formality," he insisted. "Why complicate things?" But I took the folder anyway. Back in Chicago, my lawyer flipped through the papers, eyebrows rising higher with each page. She didn't smile. She didn't stall. She called me the next morning. "This isn't a refinance," she said. "It's a transfer of liability. If you sign, you're responsible for their debt." Debt? I'd stared at the phone numb. What debt? She explained slowly, carefully, a second mortgage, months of missed payments, foreclosure letters, things I didn't even know existed. And the moment I understood, something inside me locked into place. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something steady. 2 months later, Dad called again, this time asking for money. Not a loan, not help, money. He said it was for Mom's medical bills, but when I offered to pay the hospital directly, he crumbled. The story shifted. The truth leaked out, late payments, deadlines, desperation. And now sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching Jenna glow under everyone's attention, the weight of those 2 months pressed against my ribs. They weren't giving her the house. They were giving her the debt, and they expected me to sit quietly beside her while it happened. By the time November rolled around, the secret sat between my parents and me like a live wire. We did not talk about the papers I refused to sign or the call where Dad admitted the truth. Our conversations shrank into weather updates and questions about work, as if small talk could cover a crater. They did not know I had done more than refuse. I pulled the property records myself. I knew about the second mortgage, the interest eating them alive, the foreclosure clock already ticking. They were drowning and trying to drag someone else under with them. At first, I thought that someone was always meant to be me. I was the one with the stable job in Chicago, no kids, the person they saw as a safety net they were entitled to. Saying no to them was like learning a new language that tasted like guilt. Then Jenna started posting hints online, captions about big changes, photos on the front porch with our parents, jokes about being ready to be a homeowner. Every post felt like another piece snapping into place. A week before Thanksgiving, Mom called to gush about how excited Jenna was to host more often once things were settled with the house. She said it lightly, as if the house were a gentle heirloom, not a bomb they were wrapping in a bow. That was the night I stopped hoping they would fix it on their own. I went to my desk, pulled out a folder, and started filling it. Copies of payments overdue, notices the summary pages that showed exactly how deep they were. I did not plan to humiliate them. I planned to make sure no one could say they did not know what they were walking into. On Thanksgiving morning, I drove back with that folder in my bag and a knot in my stomach. Part of me still wanted to believe they would pull me aside, admit the plan had gone too far. Instead, Mom met me at the door with a tight hug that smelled like perfume and strain. "You look beautiful," she said. "Jenna is going to be so happy you're here." The way she said Jenna, not we told me everything. Inside, the dining room was set, extra leaves in the table glasses shining, every chair filled but mine. My grandmother caught my eye from her usual spot and gave me a small nod like she knew more than she was saying. As I slid into my place, my hand brushed the edge of my bag. Paper against canvas. Proof against denial. If they were turning this dinner into a performance, I was done playing the quiet extra. When my sister rose from her seat and tapped her glass, I already knew I was about to watch the curtain lift on a performance they'd rehearsed without me. Jenna stood there, glowing, her hair curled perfectly, the necklace our grandmother gave her, catching the light like it had been chosen specifically for the moment she was about to steal. "Mom and Dad are signing the house to me," she announced, her voice bright enough to carry across every plate and every glass. "Emily gets nothing." The room erupted before the meaning had even finished sinking in. Cheers, loud claps, a few whistles, and the kind of laughter people use when they think they're supporting something good. Someone actually slapped Dad on the back. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye like she was witnessing an engagement. I didn't touch my glass. I didn't even blink. I just looked at Jenna and smiled. Not wide, not warm. The kind of smile that holds the weight of everything you aren't saying yet. Then I lowered my fork onto my plate and asked Dad, should I tell them? Or will you? The effect was instant. It was like my words cut a wire. The room dropped into silence so heavy I could hear the radiator tick. Dad's hand slipped. His fork hit the plate with a metallic clatter that echoed. Jenna's expression pinched. Tell us what? Around us relatives leaned forward, scenting drama. My grandmother exhaled sharply, as if she'd been waiting for anyone to stop pretending everything was fine. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it in front of me. I didn't open it yet. I just let it sit there, resting like a quiet threat. Before you celebrate Jenna getting the house, I said calmly, you should probably know the condition it's in. Dad tried to recover. Emily not here. Why not, I asked. You weren't embarrassed when you decided to sign it over to her without telling her about the debt. Heads turned. Conversations died. Jenna stiffened like someone had pulled a string tight inside her. What debt, she snapped. I finally opened the folder. A stack of payments bills and overdue notices stared up at us. I slid one page forward, the summary line in bold. They're behind on payments, I said, on 2 mortgages. The second one was taken out without telling anyone. They're months from foreclosure, maybe weeks. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Dad reddened. Jenna blinked like she'd been slapped. That's not true, she said, her voice rising. They would have told me. Did they tell you, I asked, eyes steady on hers, that the house comes with over $100,000 in debt? That if you sign those papers, you're responsible for every overdue payment and every penalty? Something cracked in her expression. Doubt crept in. Dad tried again. You're making this sound worse than it is, Emily. We're handling it. Are you? I held up another page. Because this one says the bank isn't convinced you're handling anything. He lunged forward as if he could snatch the paper out of my hand right there in front of 20 witnesses. I pulled it back before he could touch it. Stop, Mom begged. Please, don't do this today. Why not, I asked. You chose today. The relatives started shifting in their chairs, some uncomfortable, some newly curious, a few openly furious at being included in this spectacle they hadn't been prepared for. My Aunt Diane was the first to speak. Daniel, she said sharply, is this true? Dad didn't answer. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Mom buried her face in her napkin. Jenna looked between them and me. But they said the house was mine. It was never a gift, I said softly. It was an escape route for them. They needed someone to carry the debt. First they tried to trick me. When that didn't work, they chose you. Jenna stood frozen in her sequined dress, shaking. Her fiancé Tyler leaned away from her slightly, like he wasn't sure if he should be associated with any of this. Is she lying? He asked my parents. Mom sobbed. Dad didn't look up. That was enough. Tyler pushed back his chair and stood. You told me the house was paid off. You said we'd have a clean start. Jenna reached for him, but he stepped back. You expect me, he said, voice trembling between anger and disbelief, to start a life on a sinking ship, Tyler. Please. He shook his head. I'm not marrying into this. The room gasped collectively as he walked out past the turkey, past my stunned parents, out the front door without looking back. Jenna's legs gave out. She dropped into her chair, hands shaking mascara smudging down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. This isn't my fault, she whispered. I didn't know. I know, I said, quietly. Dad slammed his palm onto the table. You ruined everything. I stared at him. No, you ruined everything the minute you tried to hand your debt to your children like it was an inheritance. You're tearing this family apart, Mom sobbed. It was already broken, I said. I'm just refusing to keep sweeping the pieces under the rug. A murmur rippled among the relatives' agreement, disappointment judgment, the kind that stings more because it comes from witnesses who saw everything. My grandmother stood slowly, using the table for balance. Her voice, though thin, carried more authority than anyone else's. I taught you better than this, she said to my father. Your daughters are not lifeboats for you to climb into. Dad shrank. Mom wept harder. Jenna finally looked up at me, eyes hollow. What do I do now? The question hit deeper than she meant. Not because I had the answer, but because she was finally asking the right person, not the parents who built her illusions, but the sister they'd pushed aside. Before I could speak, someone knocked on the door. Hard. Every head turned. The knock came again louder. Dad frowned. The door opened and a woman stepped inside. Plain suit, badge clipped to her belt, calm, unreadable expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Nolan," she asked. "I need to speak with you regarding your mortgage records." The room erupted again, this time in a wave of disbelief. Mom nearly collapsed. Dad went white. Jenna grabbed the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't move. I just sat there breathing slowly, watching the truth finally land where it belonged. "Why is she here?" Dad whispered, voice cracking. The investigator didn't blink. "We received a report of potential financial misconduct. I have a few questions. You could have heard a pin drop. Not one person cheered now. Emily," Mom sobbed. "Tell her you misunderstood, please." I didn't answer. Not yet, because the truth was only beginning to unravel. When the investigator stepped into the house, everything that had held my parents together finally snapped. She asked calm, measured questions about payments, overdue, notices, the second mortgage, and each answer they avoided made the room feel smaller. Relatives drifted away from them like they were stepping back from a fire. Jenna sat motionless, her hands shaking in her lap. She wasn't angry anymore, just emptied out like someone had drained the color from her. My grandmother stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder, steady and silent. When the investigator left with the documents, the house fell into a heavy quiet. Mom tried reaching for me. Dad muttered that I'd embarrassed them. Neither apology nor blame landed. I picked up my coat. Jenna whispered, "Don't go. I'll still be here," I told her. Just not for their lies anymore. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. My parents were forced to confront what they'd built layer after layer of secrecy, excuses, and debt. The house went up for sale. They moved into a small apartment across the city, quieter than they'd ever been. No more grand announcements. No more golden child illusions. Jenna started therapy. She called me often sometimes, to cry sometimes, just to sit in silence on the phone. She told me she finally understood why I stopped letting our parents speak for me. As for me, I learned something I should have known years ago. Telling the truth isn't betrayal. Hiding it is. And families built on denial always collapse eventually. If you've ever had to stand alone at a table full of people who claim to love you, tell me where you're listening from. And after hearing my story, what would you have done? The first thing I remember is the sound forks stopping mid-air as my sister pulled her boyfriend toward me, her smile already mocking before she spoke. Christmas lights flickered across her face when she said it. "This is the failure of our family." My parents laughed like it was tradition, like humiliating me was part of the holiday menu. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But he did. He looked at them, then at me, and his voice cut through the room. "Interesting. Because she's not the one who's done." And that was the moment everything quietly shifted. My name is Serenity Hale, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived at the edge of every room in my own home. Even as a kid, I learned how to move quietly, how to carry plates without clattering them, how to stand where the light didn't reach, how to leave space for the people my family actually noticed. Most nights, dinner felt like a stage play where everyone else had lines. Lila always sat in the center under the bright chandelier, her plate filled first. Mine was whatever was left when the serving dishes came back around cold vegetables, a broken corner of bread, the smallest piece of chicken. I didn't complain. Complaining only led to Diana's voice, soft but sharp. "Don't be greedy, Serenity." She said it so often it became a kind of rhythm in the house. Richard barely looked in my direction unless something needed fixing. A broken faucet, a late bill, a chore. Lila didn't feel like doing. I was good for tasks, not attention. He called it building character, though somehow Lila never needed the same lessons. She got new clothes, new clubs, new opportunities. I got lectures about being realistic and grateful. I remember one winter afternoon, Lila forgot her project for school, some elaborate poster Diana helped her with. When the teacher called about it, Richard didn't ask Lila why she left it behind. He turned to me instead, irritation ready in his voice. Why didn't you remind your sister? As if my role wasn't to live my own life, but to keep hers from falling apart. Lila didn't even look guilty. She never did. In our house, guilt was something assigned, not earned. The older we grew, the more invisible I felt. My achievements, small, hard-won, vanished in the shadow of her performances. I remember earning a place in an art program downtown. I came home with the acceptance letter, heart racing, thinking maybe this time they'd see me. Diana read it in silence before placing it neatly on the counter. Lila has dance that day, she said, and we can't be driving all over town. When I didn't respond, she added, your mother would want you to be practical. The acceptance letter went into the trash that night. Lila's dance costumes arrived 2 days later. Money disappeared the same way my chances did, quietly. Payments meant for my classes, my savings, my future. Redirected into Lila's needs, new shoes, competition fees, weekend trips. I learned not to ask where my portion went. Asking only made Richard sigh like he was tired of educating me. We invest where it matters most, he'd say. I always knew what that meant. The funny thing is, no one ever called it favoritism. They called it support. They called it doing what's best. They called it family. And I believed them because believing made the house feel less cruel. Still, I wasn't entirely blind. I had my own small rebellions, late nights, drawing in the laundry room studio above the washers, saving scraps of my allowance in envelopes hidden behind detergent bottles, building a quiet world where I didn't have to earn a place at the table. But even then, even with all the clues, a part of me thought things might change someday. That if I worked hard enough, stayed steady enough, quiet enough, I'd be invited into the warmth they reserved for her. It took me a long time to understand that warmth was never meant for me. That was the day I learned my place in this family. It happened quietly, the way erasures always do. A missing name, a shifted glance, a door closing without sound. I was in the office late, the kind of evening where the city outside feels like a distant hum. Lila's voice carried from the break room, bright, rehearsed, careless. My sister doesn't have a real career, she said loud enough for laughter to follow. She just floats around. Adrian only keeps her around out of pity. I didn't step in. I stood behind the half-open conference door, one hand on my laptop bag, breathing through the familiar sting. By the time I walked past them, the conversation had already changed, as if the insult had never existed. But the next morning, the real blow came. My concept file, weeks of work, was gone from the shared folder. In its place was a new version renamed Polished, just enough to look like someone else's idea. Lila's initials sat in the signature line. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The cursor blinked, patient, indifferent. A soft knock broke the stillness. The intern stepped in, shoulders curled like he was trying to disappear. I saw her download your file yesterday, he whispered. She deleted the original. His eyes flicked toward the hallway. I didn't know what to say. I nodded. Not at him, at the pattern, at the cycle so old it felt like part of my bloodstream. I opened the access logs. There it was, her username, the timestamp, the deletion, the upload, clean, intentional. During the afternoon meeting, Lila told the story again. Serenity dropped out of everything when we were younger. She always crumbles under pressure. People chuckled politely. Adrian didn't. His gaze shifted toward me for half a second, like he was reading something in the space I occupied. I kept my hands still on the table, fingers resting on the cold edge, silence wrapped around me like an old coat, heavy but familiar. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask why she felt entitled to rewrite me year after year. When the meeting ended, she brushed past me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just smiled. I didn't go home after that meeting. I walked out of the office, down the elevator, and into the cold evening like I was stepping underwater. Cars moved. People talked. Holiday lights blinked against the windows of downtown buildings. None of it felt connected to me. I kept walking until the cold burned enough to make everything sharp again. When I finally stopped, I was in the co-working space 2 blocks from our agency. The keypad clicked under my fingers. The lock beeped open. Inside the room was empty, just white light on long tables, the hum of a printer someone forgot to turn off, and the faint smell of stale coffee grounds. It was the kind of silence that doesn't comfort but steadies. I placed my laptop on the table and opened the logs. Every timestamp was a small betrayal. Lila downloading my concept, the deletion, her upload, the edits. Then the email she sent Adrian late at night claiming the original direction had flaws and she had fixed it. I didn't react. I just kept scrolling. Access logs don't lie. They don't gossip. They don't twist stories. They only reveal what someone actually touched. I copied everything into a folder I labeled plainly documents. Then I started collecting. Payments, bills, transfers, screenshots of budgets she'd signed without approval, emails where she hinted that I was overwhelmed, not ready, emotionally inconsistent. She had built her own version of me in the system, one that justified taking my work, my credits, my place. It wasn't new. It was simply the first time I had proof. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from my aunt, a photo of old paperwork she found while cleaning, payments my mother had left for me, savings meant for my future, the ones that disappeared when I was a teenager. "Your mother wanted you to have these," she said. I stared at the screen long enough for the blue light to sting my eyes. Then I added the files to the folder. Around 1 a.m, I walked to the back corner of the space where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the dark city. Snow had started falling, fine whisper-light flakes drifting under the street lamps. I watched them until my breath slowed, until my pulse steadied. Then I opened a new spreadsheet, a simple one, a list of everything I had built at the agency, clients I brought in, campaigns I directed, projects Lila had claimed, folders I created, budgets I balanced, hours I logged. It stretched longer than I expected. Most people think revenge feels hot. Mine was cold, methodical, a sequence of small administrative actions, typed, saved, filed. The next morning, before anyone arrived, I went to the old studio above the laundromat on the edge of Aurora, the place where I built my first freelance jobs. The machines downstairs rumbled, shaking the floorboards the way they always did. The air smelled like detergent and warm metal. I slid open the storage drawer. My old drives were still there, wrapped in a scarf from years ago. I plugged them in and waited. Folders bloomed on the screen, early sketches, concept drafts, original styles that eventually became the agency's signature tone. All mine. All the seeds Lila grew her reputation from. I took what I needed, not out of spite, but because it was mine to take. When I returned to the office, Adrian was in the conference room, staring at his laptop like he was trying to outrun a headache. He looked up when I walked in. "Sit," he said softly. I did. He turned the screen toward me. "My file, the one Lila claimed." He tapped the corner. "Your metadata's still inside." Of course it was. She changed the name, not the backbone. He opened the access logs next my folder from the night before. "You pulled everything he said." I nodded. "I didn't push you into this, did I?" "No." "And you're sure you want me involved?" I thought about it. About silence. About what happens when you speak and no one listens. About what happens when you stay quiet and everyone assumes you'll never stop swallowing what hurts you. "Yes," I said. He studied me for a moment, not with pity, but with the kind of focus people use when assembling something delicate. Then he leaned back. "HR needs this. Legal needs this. And the board needs to know where the credit actually belongs." His voice wasn't angry. It was factual, administrative, clean. We spent the next 2 hours assembling the file. Every document, every log, every payment discrepancy, every moment where my work had been fed into Lila's pipeline of praise. Typed, printed, signed. Around noon, he slid the final packet across the table. "I'll handle the process," he said. "You don't have to be the one to deliver this." But part of me wanted to, not to confront her, not to explain, not even to win. I wanted to stop being the silent witness to my own erasure. I picked up the packet. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I rested my hand on it, steady and calm. This time, I said, I won't fix what they've broken. I arrived late on purpose. Christmas dinner was already in motion when I stepped through the doorway of my father's house. The air was thick with cinnamon-roasted meat and the kind of laughter that sounds rehearsed. Lights glowed too warmly against the cold outside. Every year, this house tried to convince the world it was a home. I stood near the hallway, letting my coat drip meltwater onto the tile. They didn't notice me at first. Lila was busy performing, spinning small stories for distant relatives, retelling successes she hadn't earned, leaning into Adrian's shoulder like she owned the room. He wasn't touching her back the way he usually did. His hand hovered a moment, then dropped. When Richard finally spotted me, he gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Sit. We've been waiting." His tone implied it was my fault for shifting the picture. Diana's eyes flicked over me, coat, shoes, hair, as if checking for flaws. "Try not to make an entrance," she murmured. I didn't answer. I took the seat at the edge, half-shadowed the way I always had. Dinner resumed. And then inevitably, Lila rose from her chair, pressing a hand to Adrian's arm as if inviting applause. "I want everyone to meet my sister," she said, voice bright. "This," she paused, smiling with practiced sweetness, "is the failure of our family." Richard laughed first. Diana nodded, almost proud of the line. Conversations tapered off into that familiar hush of communal cruelty. The sound was the same one from childhood dinners, the one that told me to stay small, stay quiet, let the moment pass over me. Adrian didn't laugh. He set his fork down with a soft clink. The room stilled around the sound like someone had drawn a curtain across the noise. Christmas music from the kitchen speaker faded into insignificance. He looked at Lila, then at her parents, then slowly at me. "Interesting," he said, voice low and steady, "because you're fired." The sentence landed without force, without theatrics, just truth, placed gently in the center of the table. Lila blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "What we're done," he added. "Effective immediately." A few relatives shifted, unsure whether to pretend they hadn't heard. The silence wrapped itself tightly around the room. Adrian reached for his tablet, swiped once, and connected it to the living room TV. The screen brightened, washing the room in cold light. The first file appeared, the original concept documents. My name embedded in the metadata, then the access logs, time-stamped, unedited. Lila's username glowing beside every action she thought no one would trace. Download, delete, upload, slide after slide documented what she had taken, not just the file, but months of work, client strategy, design drafts. Her voice shrank as the evidence built itself. "I didn't," she began. He didn't look at her. "You did." When the payments appeared, transfers, she initiated budget approvals. She signed without clearance. Richard sat back in his chair, face tightening the illusion, finally cracking. Diana opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no script for this. Adrian continued calm as ever. "The board received the full report this morning. HR has already processed the termination. And the final note..." He clicked once more. My portfolio appeared. The actual one, the campaigns I built, the projects I led, the clients I brought in. Years of work hidden behind their narrative. "Serenity," he said. "Eyes on me now, not asking for permission, simply stating, reality is the co-founder and principal strategist of our agency." She always has been. No applause, no vindication, just a shift in the air as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years, and finally exhaled. Lila stepped back from the screen like it burned her. "You're choosing her over me," Adrian looked at her with the same quiet finality he'd used all night. "I'm choosing the truth." No one looked at me directly. They couldn't. The story they built had collapsed in front of them. I sat there, hands folded loosely, heart steady. For the first time, my silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like authority. Seattle didn't feel like a fresh start right away. At first, it was just distant gray mornings, unfamiliar bus routes, the sound of rain against a window that didn't belong to any version of my past. But distance has its own kind of mercy. It gives the mind room to breathe, to unfurl, to rethink the shape of a life. My new apartment was small, with clean walls and a single plant I kept near the window. The city outside was quieter than Aurora in winter. No rehearsed laughter, no curated family image, no roles I had to play, just the steady rhythm of rain tapping softly like it was checking in. Adrian helped set up the new office, not out of obligation, but because he understood the difference between space built for survival and space built for living. We kept things simple: wood desk, soft chair, a few pinned sketches from campaigns that were actually mine. Work felt different here, lighter. Not because it was easier, but because no one was trying to take it from me. I didn't cut my family off. I just stopped orbiting them. Whatever consequences they faced, audits, questions from relatives, fractured stories they handled without me. Silence can be cruel, but sometimes it's the only language people understand. On Christmas Eve, a year later, I cooked dinner with coworkers who had quietly become friends. We packed extra meals and walked them to a shelter nearby. The air was cold, but the kind that wakes you up, not the kind that freezes you in place. When I sat down at my own small table afterward, I placed the best portion on my plate, crispy, warm, perfectly chosen. No one told me I didn't deserve it. No one measured my worth against someone else's appetite. The moment was quiet, almost nothing, but it felt like a life finally folding into itself, whole, unbent mine. I used to think survival meant staying quiet long enough for someone to finally see me. Now I understand silence differently. It isn't emptiness. It's a door I can choose to open or close, a room no one enters unless I allow it. I stopped asking for a family that only clapped when I failed. And once I stepped away, the noise they made never followed. Wherever this story finds you, may you feel the steadiness of walking toward a life that answers back.